Kyle Busch is likely returning to Richard Childress Racing in 2026 and beyond, and Roger Penske has fired Tim Cindric from Team Penske. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Anthony Alfredo's 2025 Hyper Steel scheme that we'll see at Charlotte Motor Speedway. This scheme's okay in my opinion. It's also really exciting to see a new sponsor coming on to work Anthony Alfredo. The scheme's okay, but it's not the greatest paint scheme we've seen so far this year. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Blaney's 2025 Body Armor Chill scheme that we'll see in the CocaCola 600. I really love this paint scheme. The colors pop. They look incredible. The blue, the red, everything about this looks really awesome. I think Team Penske knocked this one out of the park. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Sheldon Creed's 2025 Pit Boss Grill scheme that we'll see at Charlotte. I really love this car. I think the Haas factory team did a really solid job on this car. It looks really strong. The colors work very, very well on this one. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack at Charlotte. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Corey Heim's 2025 Chiefs scheme that we'll see next weekend at Nashville Super Speedway. This course in association with Eric Church, this bar that he has in Nashville. I gotta say this car looks really, really awesome. I think 2311's had some hit or miss paint schemes this year, but this is definitely one of the better ones. I think this looks really awesome, and it looks really good, and it'll be great out on the track. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Connor Mosak's 2025 Apollo Peck scheme that we'll see in the Truck Series race later tonight. I think this truck's okay in my opinion. It's really exciting to see that Connor Mosak does have a new sponsor for this weekend in the truck race, and I think the car or truck does look alright. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Blaine Perkins' 2025 Crocodile Cloth scheme that we'll see this weekend at Charlotte. I like this car decently. It's nice to see a new sponsor coming in to work with Blaine Perkins. It's decent, but it's not the perfect paint scheme in my opinion. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Dean Thompson's 2025 Thompson Patriota scheme that we'll see tomorrow in the Xfinity race at Charlotte. This scheme's alright in my opinion. I think there's been some good schemes from Dean Thompson this year. This one's alright. It does got that patriotic feel you're looking for though. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Josh Bilicki's 2025 Zero scheme that we'll see in the CocaCola 600. This scheme looks really good. You've got the patriotic look to it. There's some really nice features to this car. It does look nice. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack in the CocaCola 600. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Nick Sanchez's 2025 Borchetta Bourbon scheme that we'll see this weekend at Charlotte. This is honoring Chip Ganassi's 35th year being an organization in motorsports. I gotta say, this one does look very, very good. The colors pop perfectly on this car. It looks very, very solid. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend at Charlotte Motor Speedway. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Charlotte purse money for this weekend. So every time we have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series race, Bob Pockets puts out the purse money for the event. And according to Bob for the Cup race, it's $13,651,450. For the Xfinity race, it's $1,651,939. And for the truck race, it's $782,900. I believe I'm not mistaken, that is the largest purse outside of the Daytona 500 this year, one of the largest purses we have probably seen in recent years in the NASCAR Cup Series. For the Truck Series, it's not really many changes from prior times. That's why you're not seeing as many trucks show up this weekend as Charlotte, unfortunately, especially since we're at a home track. And for Xfinity, the numbers are really solid. I think the numbers do look solid in my opinion for that. I think they're definitely decent. They could be better, but I think the numbers are not too bad for this weekend, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ford. As it was announced earlier today that Ford is going to have a new partnership and going to be in some really cool tournament with all their current Xfinity drivers in the series. This includes Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Kyle Sieg, Ryan Sieg, and I believe another driver in Ford camp as well. And I believe Harrison Burns is part of this group as well. This is going to be part of the Gene Haas Foundation where they're going to be paying for the next couple weeks. And whatever foundation ends up winning which one and makes money will go to charities. I really like that Ford is doing this. Obviously, this is a really big deal. Gene Haas, of course, has a major association with the Xfinity Series currently at the moment. All the teams in the series get their stuff from Gene Haas's group over there at the Haas Factory program. And I got to say, this is a really huge and awesome foundation that is coming into play. I think this is awesome. I think it's great they're doing this. And I think that's a big deal. They've got something like this coming out because having something like this and having kind of a tournament in a really positive way is something that's nice. And I think it's something cool that they're doing overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Coke. As it was announced earlier today that Coke will sponsor Bubba Wallace in 2025 and has joined 2311 Racing. They are going to be associate sponsor on Bubba Wallace's every single race for Bubba Wallace for the remainder of the year. And Bubba Wallace, I believe if I'm not mistaken, will be back with the CocaCola Racing family going forward. For a long time, the soda drink that Bubba Wallace had as a sponsor was Dr. Pepper, but of course at the end of last year, Dr. Pepper left the program. Many of you had probably spotted this at Daytona, but many probably saw that the Bubba Wallace had a Coke bottle, and many, like myself, thought there was a very good chance that possibly the Coke was going to be returning in some way, shape, or form. So this is a really big deal for Bubba Wallace to have a sponsor like this come back to work with him, and I really hope we get to see a Coca-Cola car for Bubba Wallace in the near future. This is really awesome to see. I wonder if this will have any association with any of the other drivers. I'm very intrigued to see if that will come into play, but I think this is really huge nonetheless, and glad to see that Coke will be working with Bubba Wallace going forward. Really awesome stuff. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Mason Majio. As it was announced yesterday that Mason Majio will drive the 22 truck for Raymond Brothers Racing this weekend at Charlotte Motor Speedway. I believe this will be either the first or second truck series start that Mason Majio has had this year. Mason Majio, of course, made select starts in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025, driving for Joey Gase Motorsports. Of course, one of the owners of the team worked at Floridian, and of course, he has a big association with the Joey Gase Racing team currently at the moment. And Mason Majio does have a really big association with that program. I think Mason's a very talented driver. The problem I see here is the equipment he's in. I think Raymond Brothers is one of the slowest organizations on the racetrack on a week-by-week basis, and I do unfortunately think that it's going to affect him in a very negative way. But I think he's going to have decent speed. I think for him, he's going to run a lot better in that car or truck than we've seen other people, but I also think it could be a struggle for him this weekend at Charlotte Motor Speedway, but a great opportunity nonetheless to see him in a truck in the Truck Series this year. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about JJ Yeley. Now, we do have a couple JJ Yeley stories to talk about today on the channel. The first one involves him running in the Xfinity Series race, as it was confirmed earlier today that JJ Yeley will drive the 53 for Joey Gase Motorsports this weekend at Charlotte Motor Speedway. He'll be attempting to make his first Xfinity Series start of 2025. Of course, he actually attempted to run the race at Rocking, but they took him out of the car after Catherine Lake failed to qualify for the event with the owner's point situation, and we all kind of saw what happened. Casey Kane got taken out of that event, unfortunately, and William Swash just ran into the back of her, and it was a big thing there. He also tried to race the Xfinity race at Daytona, but unfortunately failed to qualify for that event. I think JJ Yeley is a very talented driver. I know what happened many years ago at this track back in 2006 with Mark Martin, but I think since that time, JJ Yeley's improved as a race car driver and has absolutely gotten better. So I really think that JJ is going to be strong, and I think he'll have a good chance and opportunity for a good run. We'll see what he can do this weekend at Charlotte Motor Speedway, Joey Gase Motorsports. I think he's going to be in for a pretty good run with this program and team, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about JJ Yeley once again. As it was confirmed yesterday as well that JJ Yeley will drive the number 44 for NY Racing for 2 more races in 2025. You also have Fanatics as a sponsor for those events. The first race that was confirmed was next week at National Super Speedway. Of course, Derek Cross will be driving the 44 this weekend in the Coca-Cola 600, and he'll also run the season finale at Phoenix as well. Now, I don't think this is going to be the last time we're going to see JJ Yeley in this car because he's driven for NY Racing quite a few races over the last couple of years. And NY Racing is a massive fan of JJ Yeley. They really like working with him, and JJ's been able to give some really good feedback to this program. So I think he's going to have a solid performance this weekend for their standards next weekend, I should say. They've had decent speed when JJ Yeley's been behind the wheel. Like I said, he's been able to give a lot of really good feedback, and I think he's going to do a pretty solid job with this program. So I'm excited to see what he can do. We'll see how he can end up performing this weekend with the team. I think he's in for a really good chance and a really strong opportunity. We'll see where the speed can be, and we'll see if he can be a major factor in serious contender for a potential win, or not a win, but at least a good runs in the next couple of weeks. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about some spotter changes ahead of the Coca-Cola 600. Now, there are 2 very notable spotter changes that are going to be happening starting this weekend at Charlotte Motor Speedway for the Coca-Cola 600. First, the big one in the NASCAR Cup Series. Stevie Reese, who's been a long-time spotter for Chris Bell since he got up to the NASCAR Cup Series in 2020, he will no longer have Stevie Reese as a spotter. Matthew Philpott will be taking over spotting duty starting this weekend at the Coca-Cola 600. Also, TJ Maters will not be spotting for Brad Keselowski this weekend, and the spotter for this weekend will be Todd Brewer. Now, let's first begin by talking about Brad Keselowski. Apparently, it was reported on the Dale Jr. Dallin that TJ Maters does have an operation going on currently at the moment where he's going to have to sit out for the next month, so Todd Brewer is going to be in as substitution role. But the big shock for me is Stevie Reese being out, considering he just won the NASCAR Cup Series All-Star race. And the fact he's not going to be spotting for Christopher Bell anymore, I think that is a major disappointing and kind of a really shocking thing, to say the least, considering the success that Stevie Reese and Christopher Bell have had. Some of the decisions we've seen from Joe Gibbs Racing in the last year or so, I do have to question quite a bit, because I personally do think that this is definitely a questionable decision at best. I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to change things up since we're about halfway through the regular season. This is the halfway race for the regular season. But at the same time, why break something up that is working so well? That's why I question the move of Chris Gabehart and Denny Hamlin not working together, even though it's worked pretty well with Chris Gale and Denny Hamlin this year. But I think this is definitely a very questionable move, because, again, I just feel like that this is something that definitely should not have happened at this point. If you're going to do this, wait till either the beginning of the year or wait till the end of the year. Don't do it in the middle of the year, because it definitely can jumble up, and I think the chemistry could be definitely off with something like this happening. We'll see what happens going forward, but I think this is definitely a little bit questionable, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, we do have a couple Kyle Busch stories to talk about today on the channel. The first one revolves around Kyle Busch congratulating Kurt Busch on making the NASCAR Hall of Fame. So, of course, we know it was announced on Tuesday that Kurt Busch was, of course, inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And Kyle Busch congratulated him, saying that Kurt's career did not end on the best terms, but he said that Kurt was one of the best drivers he ever got to race against, and he congratulated him on a lot of success. You think about Kurt Busch, 34 career NASCAR Cup Series victories, of course won the championship in 2004, won the CocaCola 600 in 2010, won the 2017 Daytona 500, and he won with pretty much every single team that he could basically get behind the wheel, including Phoenix, where he won Xfinity Series race for that program. He, of course, had a chance to win Furniture Row, almost won a few races, got in the playoffs for the first time, springboarded them into having a lot of success with Martin Truex Jr., won with Chip Ganassi Racing, really built that program up from time to time, and overall, Kurt Busch is one of the best ever to race in the sport. In my opinion, one of the most underrated drivers to race in NASCAR Cup history. So I think this is a really nice acknowledgement from Kyle Busch to congratulate his brother on making the NASCAR Hall of Fame. There's been a lot of thank you posts from a lot of people thanking him and congratulating him on making it in. And I think if it wasn't for Kurt Busch, a lot of these organizations like Furniture Row or even 2311 Racing nowadays, for that matter, probably would not have the success without Kurt Busch being over there. So I think this is a really awesome to see, and nonetheless really glad to see that Kyle Busch congratulated Kurt, because yes, Kyle Busch is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer when he retires, but Kyle Busch probably would never have gotten in the position to be at Roush many years ago when he was 16 if it wasn't for Kurt's success. So I think this is a really nice acknowledgement from Kyle, and good to see Kyle Busch congratulate Kurt Busch on making the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Really exciting stuff, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, earlier tonight, before I started watching the NASCAR Weekly podcast, Bubba Wallace put out an interesting tweet in regards to pole night. And of course, Bubba Wallace many years ago did race some Bandoleros and Legends cars around Charlotte Motor Speedway. And he talked about, and he kind of says, they would like to see pole night come back for Charlotte Motor Speedway. Many years ago for the Coca-Cola 600 in the early 2000s, back in the 90s, in the mid-2000s, to the mid-2010s, Coca-Cola 600 qualifying would actually take place on Friday night instead of Saturday afternoon. And a lot of people from there have kind of put a lot of their nostalgia clips out on Twitter and their social media pages, but I actually think that pole night coming back on Friday night for the Cup Series would honestly be a really cool thing. I just think for weekends like this, you need to make the weekend feel a lot bigger. And don't get me wrong, the Coca-Cola 600 this weekend is a huge deal. We've got the first ever Amazon Prime race, and there's definitely a lot of hype going on around it. But look at the Indy 500, for example. There is multiple weeks of build-up going into that event. Monaco, they're on the racetrack on basically getting there on Thursday, doing media days a couple days before. For the Coke 600, they arrive at the track on Friday and don't even get on track till Saturday. I feel like if we have more extended practice weekends, especially for a home-based race, and I guess some of the teams don't like that, but I feel like a longer practice session would be the way to go, especially for how big of a weekend this is. So I 100% agree. I think we need to have longer practice sessions going forward for these teams, and I think that especially since there's a lot of people that are really wanting to see longer practice sessions in the sport, I think that's what needs to happen. So we'll see what happens going forward, but I 100% agree. I want to see longer practice sessions for NASCAR going forward, and I really hope it happens in the not-so-distant future. So I think longer practice sessions, longer weekends is really big for the sport long-term, in my opinion. Now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jimmie Johnson. Now, Jimmie Johnson, of course, did many years ago compete in the Indianapolis 500, I believe in 2021 and also in 2022. But many years ago, Jimmie Johnson actually revealed that he had another opportunity to race for another team in the Indy 500. And that, according to him, was Team Penske. According to an interview he had earlier today or a couple days ago, Jimmie Johnson feels he had a deal done to run with Team Penske in the Indianapolis 500. I don't think he revealed exactly what year it was, but the reason that he unfortunately did not get the chance and opportunity to run the Indy 500 was because it was the opposing manufacturer at the time. When we think about it, I have to think this is probably around the time Jimmie Johnson was still with Chevrolet, and this probably was many, many years ago in the early 2000s, because a long time ago, they were a Honda program. And of course, Honda was the only exclusive manufacturer in IndyCar at that time. So this is probably when Jimmie Johnson was at the peak of his career. Because nowadays, yes, he of course does drive a Toyota in the NASCAR Cup Series, which of course will make his 700th NASCAR Cup start, and he's expected to make more starts in the Cup Series in 2026, as he confirmed in the same podcast. But I think it would have been amazing at Jimmie Johnson's peak of his career. It would have been amazing to see him get the chance and opportunity to run the Indy 500 because Jimmie Johnson is one of the greatest NASCAR and race car drivers of all time. Yes, he didn't have much success in IndyCar. Yes, after Chad Knaus left, he didn't have as much success. But Jimmie Johnson is still an amazing race car driver. And Jimmie Johnson is going to go down as arguably the greatest NASCAR Cup driver and NASCAR driver of all time. So I think for Jimmie Johnson, I hope down the road, and I really would love to see him, even though he's around 50 years old at this point. I think it's going to be tougher nowadays for him to run it again, but if he was younger, I think he would have had a lot of success. Nonetheless, it's certainly interesting news for sure. I hope down the road we get to see him do some stuff at Indy 500. Rumors he was going to have a program for Sebastian Bourdais this year. Of course, it did not happen. It would have been cool to see something like that, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Budweiser in the MLB. Now, we did a video covering this on the channel earlier today that many of you should go check out. But if you haven't seen it, it was announced earlier today that Budweiser and MLB will be teaming up with Dale Jr. to basically do some partnerships for the Speedway Classic. And they're going to sponsor Dale Jr. in the Budweiser car. The MLB sponsorship game for the 2001 Pepsi 400, that car is going to be on track at Anderson Speedway for the Cars Tour race on August 16, which I believe is going to be the throwback race as well. That car is also going to be shown at the Speedway Classic, Bristol Motor Speedway, when the Cincinnati Reds and the Atlanta Braves play against each other, the two big teams in that region. This is a really big deal. Of course, Budweiser has been getting back involved with Dale Jr. over the course of the last couple years. Of course, they sponsored Dale Jr. last year in the Cars Tour race at Florence Speedway. There was a lot of issues with traffic for the Cars Tour website, but I think something like this is a really huge deal because you think about Budweiser and MLB. You think about one of the most iconic cars in NASCAR, the Bud A car, the legendary. Of course, Dale Jr. recently got the trademark officially set and good to go. We're going to talk about Terresa here in just a little bit, so I got some things to say about her. But when I think about Budweiser and the MLB partnership, this is like a partnership many years ago, almost 25 years ago exact. Next year is going to be 25 years since this car was on the racetrack. And it's just phenomenal to see that this car is coming back in late model form. And it looks amazing. It looks fantastic. I think they absolutely nailed it. It looks really great. They did a great job on this one. And to me, this is a big win for the sport to see Budweiser and MLB are teaming up. Really awesome and really great stuff overall. And pretty excited to see something like this out on the racetrack. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Richard Childress Racing. Now, Joseph Stigley reported yesterday that Richard Childress Racing is going to have an announcement tomorrow on May 24th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. They were not given specific details on what this announcement is going to be, but there will be a big meeting availability that is going to happen. Now, there's been a lot of speculation on what this announcement could be. It could definitely be many, many things. One, it could be potentially announcing Kyle Busch having a multi-year contract extension with Rich Schultz Racing. We're going to talk about this later, but many people in the industry do expect that Kyle Busch is going to return to RCR in 2026. It could be that. It could also be an announcement for Will Brown. Now, Will Brown, of course, is expected to run the race at Chicago in about a month or so from now, so this could be a partnership for that. Of course, he would go to College Racing, a third car with RCR maybe helping out since the 33 car will be out there with Austin Hill. So it could be something for Will Brown, or it could be like a sponsorship announcement. Of course, sometimes when RCR does their announcements, they tend to have sponsorship announcements placed as big media availabilities, but we've been seeing them kind of do less of that with the sponsors. So it's probably a really big deal. I'm leaning toward this likely being something revolving around Kyle Busch, or something revolving around a driver maybe being announced for an event happening here. So I'm very intrigued to see exactly what this announcement is going to be. And it gets me excited too, because I don't want my hopes to be down here, so I want to see something big. Maybe this is announcing Austin Hill moving up to the Cup Series full time. Probably not, but who knows? But nonetheless, I think this is going to be very interesting to kind of see what this announcement is. I'm very much looking forward to it. And again, I'm very excited and very intrigued to see what the RCR announcement is going to be. We'll get to hear about it on Saturday morning or tomorrow by the mid-time any of you are watching this. We'll get to see it being announced here very soon, and which we'll get to hear exactly what that announcement is coming up for Rich Schultz Racing very, very soon. Pretty exciting stuff. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Terresa Nhard. Now, we of course know that the Earnhardt documentary came out today or yesterday when you're watching this video, but there was some very interesting information that came out on a podcast, and Jeff Gluck actually got a very interesting quote on that kind of made my blood boil and my skin crawl a little bit. So Dale Jr. and Kelly revealed on this podcast that apparently they're not welcome to visit Dale Sr.'s grave. Otherwise, Terresa Nhard may end up arresting them. She apparently is that strict to not allow them to go and visit the gravesite. Otherwise, they're not allowed to go there. Look, we knew Terresa Nhard was not a good person. She's done a lot of things to Dale Jr. She has sued, of course, the family relatives. She sued Kerry Earnhardt for his construction business. She has sued a lot of people. She, of course, sued for, I believe, the Indianapolis coaster, I'm pretty sure that was there many years ago. And she, of course, took control of the DEI number 8 car for many years before she gave up rights to that and basically lost control of that not too long ago. And now we're hearing this. When I heard this, I was like stunned, and I just was completely shocked. And it's one of the most evil things I have heard. Again, we know that Terresa Nhard is generally not a very good person. She's done a lot of things that just make your skin crawl and just get you really, really frustrated. But hearing something like this is one of the most unacceptable and unforgivable things that I have seen as a fan of this sport. And I've been a fan of the sport now for nearly 20 years. I became a fan of the sport around the time of the number 8 car, with Dale Jr. still being there in 2007 when Jr. was still running the DEI number 8 car. And it's good he got control of that number 8 back, but this is one of the most vile and disgusting things and despicable things we have ever seen. And I cannot believe that she is this evil to not allow the children of the family, which, by the way, she wasn't even born in the family. She basically got in and married into the family. The children should be allowed to go visit their dad's grave. The fact that they're not is just mind-boggling to me. It blows my mind. It's absolutely ridiculous and unacceptable in any way, shape, or form. And she should be crucified for this. This is not okay. To me, it should be illegal to not allow your kids to go visit the grave. Just ridiculous, uncalled for, unacceptable, and just an awful and bad look on her part. She should know better to not be like this, but it's Terresa Nhard, so something like this doesn't shock me, and it also doesn't surprise me that she's kind of like this because she's vindictive, and she's kind of an evil overall person. Just not a big fan of what I saw and heard today. Just awful stuff from Terresa Nhard, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about RFK Racing. Now, RFK Racing, of course, did confirm earlier this week, we talked about it today on the channel, that RFK Racing, of course, we expected that they were going to appeal the penalties for Chris Buescher. Chris Buescher got handed an L1 penalty for the front bumper cover being messed around on the car. And, of course, he got docked 60 points. And Scott Graves was suspended for 2 races. Now, Scott Graves will be serving the suspension this weekend at the CocaCola 600. So, regardless of what happens with this appeal, Scott Graves will be able to be back next weekend at National Super Speedway. I believe Doug Randolph will be the crew chief for him. But getting back to this, we have now officially been confirmed what the date of the appeal is going to be. The appeal is officially set for Chris Buescher on May 28th. So next Wednesday, a week, but less than a week from now, this appeal is going to take place. Now, we of course have seen a couple teams appeal so far in 2025. We think about Parker Clearman, when of course he got disqualified from the Craftsman Truck Series race, and Park Clearman and their team lost the appeal. Then a few weeks later, Chase Briscoe, they appealed their massive penalty that they had received on the rear spoiler of the car. They had a really good case, and they were able to win their appeal, and all the penalty was reduced. And Chase Briscoe moved back up into playoffs, and currently is still in the playoffs at this particular moment. And then, of course, Jesse Love got disqualified for the rock arm being messed with. They appealed it, and, of course, they lost their appeal. Then, of course, we had a couple other drivers get disqualified, Joey Logano and Ryan Preece of Talladega, which RFK was involved in that. And, of course, they did not appeal it. Honestly, I think it's kind of 50-50 at this point. If they can present a case where they can prove that they were not doing anything illegal and it wasn't something that they were truly modifying, then I do think they may have a chance and a good case here to go ahead and win. But I think when it comes to something like this, I think it is definitely going to be very, very difficult for them to win something like this, because when you look at the next-gen parts, it's kind of similar to IndyCar, so we're going to talk about here soon. But when it comes to next-gen parts, NASCAR does not want these drivers and these teams, well, the drivers don't really mess with them, but they don't want the teams messing with the next-gen parts. If you modify them, it's going to open up a can of worms. We, of course, are starting to now see days where Hendrick, Gibbs, and Penske are dominating once again, but that's not the point. The point is the fact that if you mess with these next-gen parts, you definitely can get in a lot of trouble and can basically have your season affected in a really big way. If they don't win the appeal for Chris Buescher, the goal is to go out there and win. And they don't technically have to win a race to make the playoffs right now. But I think at this point you have to kind of start thinking, yeah, they're probably going to have to win a race if they're going to want to make the playoffs. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see what happens in regards to the appeal. But to me, I think this is still a really big deal. And we'll see what happens to the appeal, which of course will be heard on May 28th, which is less than a week from now, about 5 days away at this particular point. We'll see what the decision and the ruling is going to be. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jack Perkins, as it was officially confirmed earlier tonight that Jack Perkins will make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut at Portland Speedway in late August on August 30th, driving a number 19 car for Joe Gibbs Racing. This, of course, happened reported by VA Sleuth and also Speed Cafe earlier today, but Joe Gibbs Racing has now officially confirmed the announcement. Jack Perkins is another driver coming over from Australia who raced in the Supercar Series many years ago. He currently competes, I believe, in Super 2 a couple years ago. He won a lot of races in Super 2, almost won some championships in there. He has competed in Supercars, and of course, at 39 years old, he kind of raced a little bit in Supercars. He did have decent success. He picked up a win and also got 3 or 4 podiums in Supercars as well. So compared to other drivers like Shane Van Gisbergen, Will Brown, Cam Waters, Brock Feeney, all those guys, he doesn't have as big of a resume as those guys do. But what we're noticing here in a trend is that a lot of drivers in the supercar world are getting the chance and opportunity to come over and race in NASCAR. And I think this is a really big deal. And obviously there's rumors coming out now there might be a chance of a supercar race happening at some point in the United States. There's going to be 2 international dates that are going to be taking place on the supercar schedule next year. And I have to think that this is a big tie into that. Now, for Jack Perkins, this is a solid opportunity. We, of course, have seen the Australian guys come in and run road course races. Shane Van Gisbergen actually won at Portland last year. Of course, not racing this time around, as he's going to be racing at Gateway or Darlington during that weekend for the Southern 500. But I think when you look at this, for Jack Perkins especially, this is a really good opportunity for him. Joe Gibbs Racing is one of the best teams in Xfinity competition. Eric Almirola has already picked up a win this year. Of course, we do know that Chase Briscoe does have a really good chance and opportunity to win the Xfinity Series race tomorrow night. And we've seen other drivers get in this car like Chris Rebel and show some really good pace and speed. This car, like I said, only has 1 win so far in Xfinity Series competition with Almirola, but I think that this car will have a really good chance and opportunity to win. Josh Wicke drove the same car last year in 2024 and ran top 5 before getting caught up in an incident and crash. So I think this is a really good opportunity for Jack. And I think down the road, this is not the last time we're going to see more supercar guys coming in, because there's more of these guys coming in for the Chicago Street Course weekend next in July. And you're going to have a lot of those guys showing up. So I think that this is really a major announcement nonetheless, and it gets really exciting to see someone like Jack Perkins come in who's 38 or 39 years old, a little older compared to other guys that are coming in right now, but I think it's really exciting nonetheless and pretty great to see that Jack Perkins will get the chance and opportunity to drive for Joe Gibbs Racing in the Xfinity Series. I think it's a huge deal, and I think we'll have a great chance chance and opportunity to be very competitive with Joe Gibbs Racing. We'll see how he can do at Portland, and maybe down the road we'll also see him get a chance and opportunity to make more starts in NASCAR competition. And now we're going to head to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Kyle Larson, of course, does have a very busy weekend coming up this weekend as he will be attempting to complete the double. He will run 1,100 miles, will attempt to try to win the Indianapolis 500 and complete all 500 miles in that event, and then fly to Charlotte Motor Speedway and try to complete all 600 miles. He is the biggest storyline, or one of the biggest storylines currently at the moment, headed into Indianapolis. And he actually appeared on one of the biggest podcasts when it comes to sports and YouTube as well, and that is the Pat McAfee Show. And he talked about a lot of very interesting things in regards to the IndyCar race and also NASCAR as well. Now, one thing that Cole Cusimano, who did a really good job putting out a thread in regards to this podcast, talking about some of the things, he revealed that one of the greatest drivers that he would consider is Tony Stewart. Kyle Larson has also talked about being on the same level. Many people talk about him being on the same level as Tony Stewart, AJ Foyt, Mario Andretti, and Kyle Larson says he's only still 32 or 33 years old currently at the moment, so he doesn't want to really be on there until he does have a lot more success. And while I do agree with Kyle Larson on that front that it's really good to see him on that group of people, three of the best drivers in motorsports ever, Tony Stewart, of course, just picked up an NHRA win, I think for Kyle Larson, he's 100% correct. I think Larson wants to get a lot more wins. In fact, I think he would love to win the Indy 500 this year. I think it's going to be tough because that Aaron McLaren number 17 car, while it's shown decent speed this year, I don't think it's got race-winning speed currently at this moment. But Larson definitely has shown some speed and shown some pretty good speed out on the racetrack. He's had top 10, top 15 speed. I could see him definitely getting a top 10. But I think to be in that group, he's going to have to win more types of races. Obviously, there's a lot of talk he's going to go run a Repco Supercar race or V8 Supercar race at some point this year. Probably go do the wild card race at Adelaide. And then, of course, maybe down the road we see him do some IndyCar stuff, and everyone talks about him doing Formula One, which I think it'd be cool if Larson could get that chance down the road. But I'm not sure if that is going to happen. And one other thing was talked about was stage racing. Kyle Larson kind of brought up a very interesting point in regards to stage racing. And he talked about the fact that he honestly would love to see stage racing go away, but he kind of understands what the importance of stage racing is and understands that people get the chance and opportunity to get out, especially when the caution comes out, go get a snack and come back and basically be there. I understand where Kyle Larson's come from. And I do understand 100% too that I think with stage racing, you can keep the stages. I just think personally, there's been discussion about this with the playoff committee that's been happening at this point. There has been a lot of talk and discussion that they're probably going to keep stage racing next year. But there's also right now a lot of people saying that they might get rid of the stage cautions. And I've said this for a while. Stage racing is not the worst thing in the world. The easiest thing you can do is just get rid of the stage yellows. If you get rid of the stage yellows completely, I really see something like this working. Because one of the big problems is with stage racing is you have these stage cautions. And it really just messes up the flow in the outcome of the events. If you got rid of the stage cautions altogether, I truly do believe that you would have a lot more people that would be on board with stage racing. A lot of people are big fans of stage racing, don't get me wrong. But to me, one of the easiest solutions that could really fix a lot of these problems is getting rid of it altogether, which I think if we got rid of stage racing, that'd be cool too. But I think that keeping it is not the wrong thing. I think Larson is the most successful driver in the stage racing era. It's factual. But I think we get rid of stage cautions. I think that fixes a lot of the problems. So NASCAR's talking about it, and I would definitely love to see him get rid of it. We'll see if NASCAR decides to get rid of something like that, because I think it'd be a good decision to get rid of something like that going forward with the stage cautions. In my honest opinion, I kind of hope it happens, and I kind of hope it happens for the future of the sport. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, is we have another update on the 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports lawsuit. Now, of course, a couple weeks ago, 2311 Front Row Motorsports had their hearing. We kind of talked about this on the channel. They had their hearing in regards to Stewart-Haas charters, basically them getting a preliminary injunction last year in December. They got granted that preliminary injunction so they could have their charters for the 2025 season, only through this year, because they do expect that the whole trial will be done by 2026. Well, earlier tonight, the Race Team Alliance actually filed a big thing. And they filed, according to Bob Pockers, the Race Team Alliance has filed a brief that the other 13 teams shouldn't be part of the case because they get involved in the case. This could go past 2025 and go into 2026. Now remember, the trial date for this is set for December 1st. We are currently on May 22nd. To May 23rd. So we still have about 4 or 5 months. Of course, well, 5 or 6 months, I should say, and we're still currently in the discovery process at the moment. And we still have not been given an official decision on what's going to happen to those charters if NASCAR is going to take back control with the Stewart-Haas Racing charters. But I still think the lawsuit is still going to be going on if they do lose their charters with the preliminary injunction being overturned, which of course would go back to Kenneth Bell, and Kenneth Bell would have to make another decision on what's going to happen there. Judging by how the judges reacted and how hard they were questioning the teams, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to keep their preliminary injunction. And many people do expect in the industry that there's a very good chance that they could go to something, and they're asking for them to have mediation, which it sounds like that the teams are definitely open to mediation. Of course, NASCAR is not fully at the mediation phase at the moment. They said they might be able to meet, but they also said they're not going to basically change any of the things that they're doing, and they're not going to basically grant them the charters. I think the big question is going to be, because there's obviously a lot of people that do think other teams couldn't get involved in a lawsuit, like Richard Childress Racing, for example. Obviously, RCR does have a big, we saw Richard basically call it a communist regime. And of course, Richard was not the biggest fan of the terms. And they was told, I think a lot of media members, including Dale Jr. as well, they were kind of coerced to sign the deal. And there's other teams that weren't the biggest fan of it. Rick Hendrick said his hands were tied, and he was just tired of all the stuff that was going on with it. To me, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the rest of the case plays out. Michael Jordan, of course, being involved in it very, very closely. I think, again, this is a huge case, right? Because this is going to have a major change on the landscape, I think, long term. I mean, NASCAR recently announced a new commissioner in March and April. So we've been seeing a lot of changes happening to the sport. To me, when I think about this, I think there's obviously some big things that are going to happen to sport no matter what happens to the lawsuit. But I think it's a major deal that now the Race Team Alliance is getting involved, and they're finally saying something. The other teams don't really want to get involved with it, it sounds like, because NASCAR, of course, is threatening them. And I think one of the reasons is they feel like they're threatened that if they try to join up with the lawsuit, they might lose their charters, which could cause a lot of lawsuits with the current teams at this point. So to me, it's interesting that the Race Team Alliance brings something up like this. It'll be a big story to watch out for, and we'll see if more information does come out about this in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Chicagoland Speedway. Now, a couple days ago, Jeff Gluck, who is one of the top reporters in the NASCAR industry, he went to visit Chicagoland Speedway and did a little bit of visit around the track. Now, you can obviously see in the photo that you're seeing that there's a lot of fog around the racetrack, but this is another person and talking point for Chicagoland Speedway. Over the course of the last couple weeks, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of rumors that Chicagoland could be making a return to NASCAR in 2026. Why is this their conversation? Well, this is the final year for the Chicago Street Course on the schedule, and many in the industry do believe that this will likely be the last year for the Chicago Street Course on the schedule. Many people like myself do believe that they're not going to be coming back in 2026. Now, realistically, they could sign a contract extension with the Chicago Street Course through 2027. They do have 2 extra option years that they can go with, but I do think this is going to be the final year Chicago Street Course is on the schedule. And there were rumors about San Diego coming on the schedule in 2026, but it sounds like that might be pushed for 2027. But from what we hear, it sounds like NASCAR doesn't want to leave the Chicago market. So the perfect track to go to right now is Chicagoland. Why not have a race around the 4th of July at Chicagoland Speedway? You say in that Chicago market, it's on the 4th of July weekend. And while, yes, Joliet is still pretty far away from Chicago, the city, and yes, you're going to have more of an impact from racing in the Chicago Street Course than racing at Chicagoland, the next-gen car race is a lot better right now on the intermediates than it does road courses. And Chicagoland has always put on a really good show on the NASCAR Cup side of things, especially in recent years. In 2018 and 2019 in particular, the races there were fantastic and really incredible. And in the early 2000s and the mid-2000s, the track would always put on some fantastic racing. To me, this track is a no-brainer. You need this track to be on the schedule next year. And while, yes, there's also a lot of talk about North Wilkesboro getting on the schedule, which I agree with most people, I want to see North Wilkesboro on the schedule in 2026. I want to see Chicagoland on there before North Wilkesboro gets a points-paying day, because the next-gen car races so well at the intermediate. So the easiest thing they could do at this point is give Chicagoland a points-paying day. And I really hope it does happen next year. There's a lot of momentum around it currently at the moment. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of speculation. And I do expect that we are going to see Chicagoland on the schedule next year. I just think because of all the momentum, there's been an update to the website in the last couple months. And overall, the easiest solution to make sure that this track gets there Again, it needs to be on there. The racing is really good at that track. I really hope Chicagoland's on there. I think there's a really good, reasonable chance and a strong opportunity that you are going to see Chicagoland Speedway on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule in 2026. If not, it might happen 2027. I hope it's not just for 2026. I hope it's beyond 2026 and there for more years going forward, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chip Ganassi Racing. Now, Chip Ganassi was on the Happy Harvick podcast earlier today. He talked, of course, about a lot of different things about the whole situation with Team Penske, which we're going to talk about that here near the end of the episode. But one thing was talked about near the end, and Kevin Hart brought up this question. Would you consider bringing back Chip Ganassi Racing to NASCAR in the future? And Chip Ganassi said, I get this question asked a lot of time. He says, never say never on returning to NASCAR. Now, obviously, he did say we'd have to have people and the right investors to get back involved in the sport. He says if Kevin or Dale Jr. ever want to bring a program together, call Chip to do that in a joking fashion. But Chip Ganassi Racing, we all remember how successful this team was in NASCAR. And while they weren't successful in NASCAR as much as they were in their IndyCar program, where Alex Palou has picked up 4 of the first 5 victories, has a really good chance to win the Indy 500 this weekend, they have been the dominant team in IndyCar this season, especially on the road courses. And I think you think about the success. You also have a lot of success in sports cars and had a lot of success there. But I think about Chip Ganassi Racing. This team had pretty solid success in NASCAR. When they joined in 2001, they had success with Sterling Marlin. Sterling Marlin picked up 3 or 4 wins for the program in the first year. He picked up the win at Charlotte, and of course picked up the win at Michigan in Race Short. And then of course in 2002 is kind of where the momentum stopped. Sterling Marlin was a favorite to win the championship early in that season, and then got caught up in wrecks. And then they kind of floundered from time to time, but then they started having success with Chevrolet, and they had a lot of success up until 2019 and 2021, where Kurt Busch was able to win in 2019, 2020, and 2021. And then, of course, they had Kyle Larson over there, and Kyle Larson had a ton of success with that program, as Kyle Larson is able to win a lot of races for that team. I think he's the winningest driver in Chip Ganassi Racing's history with 6 victories. He had a ton of success. And then in 2021, in the middle of the year, it was announced that Trackhouse Racing had bought up the operation of Chip Ganassi. Ross Chastain would get signed to Trackhouse Racing. Kurt Busch would go over to 23XI Racing for the final year of his NASCAR Cup career, and Kurt Busch obviously likely not coming back. But I gotta say, Chip Ganassi Racing coming back would absolutely be a really huge deal for the sport. Do I think there's a chance they come back? I think there's always a possibility that a team like Chip Ganassi Racing could come back. I've had some theories around Chip Ganassi Racing. Obviously, we do know there's a couple manufacturers that could be on the verge of coming back to NASCAR. One of them is Dodge. Dodge, obviously, there's a lot of talk right now. They're going to have a truck series and some truck series programs for 2026. One of the teams that's heavily going to be going over there is GMS Racing. And you think about teams like ThorSport, right? ThorSport Racing has not worked with Dodge, but they're in their final year of their contract with Ford right now, from what I understand. So they likely could be one of the teams that could go over. But I think about another team and other manufacturer as well with that, and they could have a cup program. But I look at another team as well, and that's Honda. Honda, there's a lot of conversations that Honda could be leaving IndyCar at the end of 2026. And we know Scott Dixon is interested in running the Daytona 500. Why wouldn't they potentially, and what is a potential possibility, is Legacy Motor Club teaming up with Chip Ganassi? Jimmy Johnson, of course, does have some association with Chip Ganassi Racing. Why not field a car and team Jimmy Johnson up with maybe Tom Brady, for example, field a car for the Daytona 500 with Scott Dixon, so Dixon can run in a 3rd or 4th Legacy Motor Club car, considering Legacy Motor Club may have a 3rd car next year for Corey Heim. They could have a 4th car for someone like a Scott Dixon. I think that would be a really awesome opportunity. So I think there's a chance that it could happen, and I really hope that we do get to see the chance and opportunity for a team like Chip Ganassi to return to NASCAR. I think there's a chance that it definitely could happen, and we'll see if it does happen going forward. In my honest opinion, I'd love to see Chip Ganassi Racing come back to the sport and maybe be a successful team. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Connor Zilch. Now, Connor Zilch, of course, is returning this weekend at Charlotte Motor Speedway and will be making his Oval Cup Series debut this weekend. He will drive the number 87 car for Trackhouse Racing with Red Bull sponsorship, and, of course, is back racing full-time the Xfinity Series and the number 88 car for Junior Motorsports. Now, Bob Pockrass did a little bit of an interesting article in regards to Connor Zilch, and there was one very interesting key thing that I noted from Bob Pockers. It talks about the fact about him potentially making more NASCAR Cup Series starts in 2026. This, of course, is Connor Zilch's second NASCAR Cup Series appearance. He ran the races circuit in America's, qualified actually pretty well around the top 15, and did have a chance at a top 10 before getting caught up in a wreck with Daniel Suarez. But a lot of conversation in the industry is about his future past 2025. And many, including myself, do believe there's a great chance and opportunity that we could see Connor Zilch in the NASCAR Cup Series as early as next year. Now, there's some people in the industry that I do think, and I do kind of don't disagree with here, that many think that Connor should stay for another year in the NASCAR Xfinity Series and race in 2026 with Junior Motorsports once again. And that would be probably the most logical decision. The problem is, Red Bull really likes Connor Zilch. He's part of the Red Bull family, and Red Bull does have a really big tie with Trackhouse Racing currently at the moment. So I've had a theory for a while now that Connor Zilch will be a full-time Cup driver in 2026. Connor has stated this publicly multiple different times in the last couple of years, but he has stated that he wants to be the youngest NASCAR Cup Series champion ever. That champion that's youngest is Bill Rexford, who is 23 years old. Connor Zilch will turn 19 in about a month or so from now, and I know that he wants to be a Cup Series driver next year. But I think he needs to take his time and not rush it. But if, let's say he does go Cup Series racing next year, which I've always predicted, who would he replace? Well, there's obviously a rumor about Shane Van Gisbergen, and there's a rumor about Daniel Suarez. There's been a rumor about Zilch maybe replacing SVG. I just don't see SVG being let go for 1 year. Especially after one season being with the program, I get he hasn't been as good on the ovals this year, and Zilch will probably be better on the ovals than SVG. But I feel like that it would be incredibly foolish considering how much they've done with SVG in the last couple of years when it comes to development. I just don't think it would make any sense in any way, shape, or form to replace SVG with Connor Zilch. Then you go to Daniel Suarez. Daniel Suarez is in a contract year. There's been a lot of stuff that's happened. Ty Norris was a big part of bringing Daniel Suarez in. He left the team to go to CocaCola Racing. And then, of course, Pitbull at the beginning of the year left the program. There's been a lot of people that think Pitbull leaving, that Daniel Suarez is going to leave the program. Now, obviously, Daniel Suarez came in after Pitbull joined the program, but a big reason why Daniel Suarez ended up over Trackhouse Racing in the first place is because of someone like Pitbull coming in. And Pitbull came into the team because of Daniel Suarez. He didn't come in because of Ross Chastain. He came in because of Daniel Suarez. So I think that's the thing you kind of have to look at. I think this is actually a really difficult decision, but personally, I think there's a chance you see this team run back the same drivers. You could see Suarez back in the 99, which wouldn't be a bad decision. Suarez does have a lot of sponsor support. He's expected to run the Xfinity Series race at Mexico City as well. So he does have the sponsors backing from Quaker State. But I also think SVG and then bring sponsorship. And Connor Zilch has really big ties at Red Bull and WeatherTech as well. And I think that's going to be the big thing. For me, my prediction was at the beginning of the year that we see Zilch replace Suarez. Daniel Suarez not had a good year this year, but he's also had some bad luck too. And Daniel Suarez hasn't been better than SVG this year, but he's not been setting the world on fire and just massively outperforming SVG, that being Daniel Suarez. So to me, for 2026, I think there's a chance that Zilch returns to the Xfinity Series, but I think there's also a really great chance and possibility that you do see Connor Zilch move up to the NASCAR Cup Series full time. I think this certainly is going to be one of the biggest stories we're watching out for throughout the remainder of the silly season this year, what happens with Zilch. But to me, I think there's a great chance and opportunity he does return to Xfinity competition, but I also think that there's a fantastic opportunity here for him to basically go up Cup racing next year. I think with the sponsorship and all that kind of stuff, that could help that opportunity. We'll see if Zilch does, in fact, move up to the NASCAR Cup Series next year with maybe some association with Red Bull. We'll see what happens going into the 2026 season. And now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories of today's episode as we're talking about Team Penske. Now, Team Penske, of course, recently was involved with some major controversy at the Indianapolis 500 during the time they were getting ready to qualify for the Fast 12. And there, of course, were some penalties handed out. Joseph Newgarden and, of course, O'Power were sent to the rear of the field and had their pit selection sent to the back of the pits, which is going to be a major impact on the Indy 500. But many in the industry felt that was not a big enough penalty. So it was announced on Wednesday, shockingly, that Team Penske has fired three major key players in the Team Penske group. Tim Cindric, Ron Rzucki, and Kyle Moyer have all been fired from Team Penske. Tim Cindric, who has been the longtime president of Team Penske, He's been there since 1999. Tim Cindric had been a major part of Team Penske rebuilding itself, and a lot of people felt like he was the long-term successor, and Blatt thought he had ownership stake in the program. That is a major shocking fire because he really helped Penske get back up to their potential. Ron Rzucki, who's been one of the higher-ups at Team Penske, he's been there for 20 years. He had basically been the engineer and race engineer for the team over there for Will Power, and of course now he's gone as well. And then Kyle Moyer was also fired. He's been with the program since 2015, having the race strategist, of course, for Scott McLaughlin. Now, they did announce earlier today the 3 people coming in to replace. Ben Bretzman will be the new race strategist for Scott McLaughlin. Luke Mason's going to be the new race strategist for Joseph Newgarden. And Will Power will have someone new as well. I believe Jonathan Dugold, who was the race strategist for Joseph Newgarden last year in the Indy 500, he will be the race strategist going forward. Now, why did Team Penske fire these people? Like I said, it had a lot to do with the rear-tended Raider controversy. While this wasn't as big of a deal as another situation, this is now the second or third big controversy that Team Penske's been part of. The reason this whole rear-tended Raider deal became a massive deal is because Team Penske owns the series. Roger Penske owns the series, and Penske Entertainment owns it. They have control of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They have control of the series. They, of course, have a team in IndyCar that's had a lot of success. And it's a massive conflict of interest. If this was any other team, it would still be a big deal, but not as big of a deal. The problem is not the first time we've seen a situation. Going back to last year with the push-to-pass debacle. Tim Cindric, Ron Rzucki were both suspended, and people in the lower bearing of the team were fired from the program, but not enough was done. And they had to make these big moves. Now, again, this is really shocking because Tim Cindric, like I've already mentioned, has been there for many years. Now, going back to the NASCAR side, a lot of people started speculating with Tim Cindric being gone, what does this mean for Austin Cindric? Well, I did verify that this technically is a contract year for Austin Cindric at Team Penske. However, the private porno account, which is ran by someone very high up in the industry when it comes to media, they did confirm that Austin Cindric will not be leaving the team at the end of this year, and his team should be safe. And considering the fact, and David Land brought this up on the NASCAR Weekly podcast, Roger Penske is very loyal to people, sometimes to a fault of his own. But Austin, because he did win the Daytona 500 in 2022, plus with the fact he's already picked up a win this year at Talladega Superspeedway, I don't see Austin going anywhere. Again, Cindric has had an up and down run in the last couple years, but this has generally been the best season so far of his NASCAR Cup Series career. So as much as some people think Cindric doesn't deserve the drive to see, which I don't really agree with, he deserves to be in that car, and he isn't going to be going anywhere anytime soon. Now, there's been some updates that have also come out from earlier today as well. So, there's expected to be a new officiating crew coming in. There's expected to be an independent group that is going to be coming in going forward. And there's expected to be new officials joining up in IndyCar as well, with an independent group and an independent governing body officiating the sport going forward. This has to be the way going forward. And then I do agree with David Land on something else as well. If we do see these moves happen, we need to see Team Penske be treated fairly. They're getting a lot of punishment because Roger Penske owns the series. But I think for Roger to fire these people, that is a major step in the right direction. And I think we need to see a lot more happen, though, because the team owners are not happy in IndyCar. And there's a lot of that mistrust at the moment in the IndyCar paddock right now. And many of the IndyCar paddock probably feel that like this is somewhat of justice, but they feel like a lot more needs to be done. In fact, I think Tim Cindric should have been fired after the St. Petersburg debacle. And you think about 2023. Many do accuse Roger and Team Penske of basically throwing a lot of red flags to really benefit Team Penske. They said it was for entertainment, but many believe that to be the case. I think when it comes to the safety and rear-tended Raider situation, which we did find out that the rear-tended Raiders were the same ones that Joseph Newgarden had when he won the 2024 Indianapolis 500, that is definitely a major problem. And I think IndyCar really had no option or choice but to make this move. A lot in NASCAR, for example, this would be like if the France family got involved and had a team and did something like this. It would be more controversial compared to like other teams like RFK or Hendrick Motorsports. But to compare this big move with Tim Cindric going away, this would be like Chad Knaus, Cliff Daniels, and Jeff Gordon being let go from the program. This is how significant this is. These three individuals have been with the program for 10 plus years, and someone's been there for 26 years. Now, for Tim Cindric, he won't be with the team going forward. I don't see him doing anything with the Team Penske long term. He's not been quiet on social media, as many of you probably saw. But I really don't think that Roger had any choice but to make this move, because a lot of people in IndyCar are not happy. Honda's not happy right now, and a lot of people are very upset at this particular moment. So to me, this is about the only logical move you can make, and I think they made the right decision to go ahead and fire these individuals from the team, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, one of the biggest things revolving around silly season NASCAR over the course of the last couple months has been wondering about where Kyle Busch was going to be going, or if he was going to be returning to Richard Childress Racing in 2026. Kyle Busch is technically in a contract year with the program right now, and there's been a lot of speculation whether Kyle Busch is going to return or if he's going to leave. And in the last couple weeks, the momentum has kind of been shifting toward the fact that many do believe that Kyle Busch will be returning to Richard Childress Racing in 2026. And it sounds like that this is about to become a reality. According to Jordan Bianchi, was doing the Dirty Mo Media, the Door Bumper Clear podcast live with Carson Elledge and Freddie Kraft. He has basically talked to Mike Verlander, who is the president of Richard Childress Racing, and he feels like and expects that Kyle Busch will return to Richard Childress Racing in 2026 and continue driving number 8 car. In fact, he did confirm that it sounds like the Kyle Busch will be in the number 8 car, not just for the 2026 season, but also beyond as well, going to like 2027 or 2028. This does not shock me or surprise me. Look, a couple months ago, I would have definitely said that he was not going to return to RCR. But I think there's a couple of reasons why that this is not changing next year for Kyle Busch leaving. Number one, Kyle Busch has been faster this year. Last year in 2024 was a really rough season for Kyle Busch. It was the first season where Kyle Busch failed to pick up a win and a victory, and they just generally did not have the speed at a lot of tracks. But near the end of the year, I noticed that the speed was starting to come back to the number 8 car. This year so far, they've had the same speed they had at the end of last year. Kyle Busch, of course, has shown race-winning speed. He almost won at Texas Motor Speedway before, of course, he spun out. And at Circuit Americas earlier this year, Kyle Busch had arguably the fastest car in the race, and he probably should have won that race at Circuit Americas had it not been for tire deficiency against guys who had fresher tires. I think Kyle Busch likely ends up winning that race. Kyle Busch has also been faster. He's not in the playoffs right now, but he's only 7 points out compared to Ryan Preece. And I think that Kyle Busch has been a lot better this year than we've seen him have. He just hasn't had the finishes to show for. Even Austin Dillon this year, who has struggled the last 2 years, he's had a couple top 10 finishes recently and has been one of the more consistent guys in the last couple of weeks. So RCR has definitely shown some improvement. I think a lot of it is with hiring of Johnny Klossmeyer and, of course, the hiring of Richard Boswell, who's been working over with Austin Dillon, and those setters from Chase Briscoe have come in and really helped that program this year on the short tracks. And Kyle Busch's short track speed, while it's not back up to top level quality, they're definitely showing a little bit more speed on the short tracks, as Kyle Busch has gotten a couple top 20s in recent short track runs. And really for Kyle Busch, what are better options are out there right now? People brought up Spire, but all 3 drivers under contract at Spire Motorsports. Michael Medell's through next year, Justin Haley is through next year, and Carson Nospar has a multi-year contract for like 2027 or 2028. And Hendrick Motorsports is very high on Carson, but he's not leaving Spire, at least for the foreseeable future. Many brought up 2311. We don't even know what the long-term future 2311 is going to be. We're not even sure if they're going to have charters next year. And Riley Herbst, Tyler Reddick, Bubba Wallace all have contracts through next year at this time. And Tyler Reddick does have a contract even past next year. And if they're going to get a 4th car, which they're not going to have 4 charters anyways, but if they're going to get a 4th car, it's going to go to Corey Heim. Some brought up Legacy, but Legacy Motor Club, in my opinion, they're going to try to get a 3rd charter perhaps, and Corey Heim would likely be the driver to go to that seat if they get that 3rd car. Then some bring up Trackhouse or the Suarez and Zilch situation. That would have been a good option for next year, but the problem is Trackhouse, I don't think, is an upgrade from RCR. The problem is there's not a lot of better rides. Hendrick is set through 2026. Bowman's got a contract through next year. Larson's contract goes through next year. William Byron's contract is technically this year, but he's going to sign an extension with the team. And Chase Ellitt's contract goes through 2027. And then, of course, JGR. Denny Hamlin has a contract, from what I understand, through next year. Chase Briscoe, same thing, I believe, next year, 2027. Christopher Bell has got a very long-term deal, and Ty Gibbs is genuinely the grandson of the team owner. And then Penske. All 3 drivers are set at least through next year, and I believe Cindric has got a long-term deal with the program coming up here in the near future. And then you think about if they're going to get anybody, it's going to be Josh Berry more than anybody else because Berry's shown good speed. If anyone was to play Cindric, it would be Josh Berry. But Logano's contract, from what I understand, goes through 28, and Blaney has a contract around that same length as well. So there just really isn't any better options currently at the moment for Kyle Busch past this year. And I get that people want to see Kyle Busch in a top-level team again, but let's also be real and honest here. As much as Kyle Busch is still a very talented race car driver, he's proven that in the Truck Series, he's not the same driver he was even 5 years ago. And I think the next-gen car has affected Kyle Busch in a pretty big way. That's something that not a lot of people talk about, but it's true. Kyle Busch has not been as strong in the next-gen era, and I think that's been one thing that has unfortunately affected Kyle Busch in a really, really negative way. But I do think Kyle Busch staying at RCR does make a lot of sense. Now, Jordan Bianchi did say that there is going to be an article coming out on a lot of the silly season moves. He's probably going to talk about Trackhouse Racing. He's probably going to talk about the Legacy Motor Club lawsuit with Rick Ware, where that's going. Probably bring up Dodge as well. But we're probably going to get more information on this, on how long the contract is. It sounds like they're only going to pick up the option right now for 26, but I do believe they're going to sign him for longer. I think Kyle Busch will stay at least through 27. If they're trying to commit him for next year, just get him a multi-year deal at this point with like an option year for 27 or 28 and continue to make that program better because Kyle Busch wants to make it work. He's been a lot happier, and I think, again, it's because there's not a lot of really much better options out there for Kyle Busch currently at the moment. So, again, it sounds like Kyle Busch will be staying with RCR past this year, and I think it's honestly the best decision that this program can make currently at the moment. So, we'll see what happens in regards to what happened for Kyle Busch's long-term future, but it sounds like right now he's staying at RCR, which is about the best decision you can make in NASCAR. He's expected to return to the program in 2026 at Richard Schultz Racing in the number 8 machine. Once again, plus Kyle Busch has more sponsors. M&M's isn't coming back to the sport. He's got 7-11 other companies working with him, so Kyle Busch isn't going anywhere, it sounds like, at this particular moment. So, that is going to be today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, those go live on my channel. Follow me to our Facebook and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go some more of that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about Kyle Busch returning to RCR more than likely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the other stories to talk about today on the channel, including the stuff around the lawsuit with Legacy Motor Club or 2311 in front row. And of course, the other story to talk about on Connor Zilch, and also the Team Penske firing Tim Cindric. We got a lot of content coming out soon. People like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Cards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain. We've got, of course, the Truck Series race review. We're going to maybe do an ARC review with around Claytis McFarland. We're also going to have content on other people coming out as well. Saturday, we're going to have reactions to the Xfinity race and some other content, CocaCola 600 qualifying reactions. And then Sunday, Coke 600 starting lineup, Indy 500 review, and then the Coke 600 race review as well. And then Monday, we're going to have NASCAR news video, and Tuesday, there should be another silly season update dropping. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.